Boom, 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 literature gets a look. Legs talk about books. And welcome once again to Legs Talk About Books, the monthly literature podcast where we talk about books.
Damn straight.
I'm your host, Hardleg Joe. Joining me today, my friend and co-host, CB Radio.
The CB stands for, I don't know.
Just no idea. You didn't have anything? Okay.
I had something planned about, like, reincarnation, but...
That's what the R stands for.
Yeah,
The
no.
C you'll find out in your next life.
The R stands for radio. What
The C stands for C of reincarnation. Because we're reading the first book in the Sea of Tranquility tetralogy, which sounds like a bunch of nonsense words almost.
Yeah, they strung together some words and somehow it made a book.
Yeah, this is Spring Snow by Yukio Mishima. I think I'm pronouncing that right. I am not Japanese. I don't speak Japanese. Neither is Brandon. So we may not pronounce these names correctly. This is a Japanese book by a Japanese author.
Again, I was graced by having the audiobook, so I do have a little bit of an advantage on the, there's a character in there called Sadako.
Yeah.
You're going to call her
Satoko.
Satoko. And I have yet to correct him on it, and this is the first
Sadako,
time.
yeah. And this book was actually the first book that we're reading due to a Patreon poll. Or rather, the patrons got to suggest books, and then I had the poll on Twitter. And this was the winner by a far margin. And at first I thought maybe the poll had been rigged, because this is way outside of our wheelhouse. Normally we do fantasy-type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I later found out this was actually reviewed by PewDiePie. This is actually his favorite author of all time. He used to have like a monthly book club thing where he read stuff, and he did Spring Snow and the book that comes after it.
And after learning more about this, I hold PewDiePie in a lower regard for this, simply because this man was nuts.
Yeah, this author was a little bit wacky. And someone had asked us to talk about them. I guess we could go ahead and mention it here just before we go at. So the author, Yukio Mishima, he stormed a Japanese military facility with a bunch of followers because apparently he had raised his own, civil protection. After World War II, Japan couldn't have a standing army. That was the rule, and he really hated that because he was big into samurais. He liked the Meijing period and the emperor. He wanted to revive that. He was very much a, He was regressive. He wanted to go back to a previous social era. Mm-hmm. And so he stormed this military facility, gave a big rousing speech to the army to try to convince them to start a coup against the government. And then when that didn't work, he committed seppuku. But a lot of people say, he knew it wouldn't succeed. He just wanted to go out in, a blaze of glory.
I mean, yeah.
He wanted to try and then show that he had principles.
And to be honest, that did help with his sales of his book and, made him immortalized in this fashion.
Yeah, I mean, say what you will about him. Clearly he did have principles. His principles were just really dumb, in my opinion.
Yeah, a little bit here, too. But
I'm not really a fan of, this regressive, let's go back to how things were. Especially with, the Meijing period. Why would you want to go back to feudalism?
Yeah.
I guess if you think you're, a noble or whatever, but for everyone else who wasn't a noble, that period sucked.
Yeah.
Well, I guess, yeah, the reason they wanted us to bring up the author was to talk about, whether or not that impacts it. No, because we just learned it.
We learned it after the book?
We learned it after the book, we just read it, and it kind of makes sense, but it doesn't really impact my feelings about it, because that was 50 years ago now at this point, 60.
It's like eating,
I'm not good at,
for me it's like eating a soup and just being like, did you know that chicken was farm fed? And be like, sure, it tastes nice.
Sure, whatever. But yeah, we'll go ahead and get into the book itself. Usually we give a little spoiler-free thoughts, and then we'll discuss the book afterwards. And as far as spoiler-free thoughts, I didn't like it.
Neither did I.
Yeah, I went into it, when this first won, I was like, why did this win? This doesn't look very interesting. But, I've been wrong before, so I'm like, you know what, let's see it. Maybe
you weren't this time.
If people like it this much, there's gotta be something interesting or good about it. Mm-hmm. And there's really not. And to sort of explain it, I have to talk about, again, my rating scale, because I don't have a simple, number scale.
Yeah.
To me, there's two different ways that a book can be good. It can be, technically good, or it can be emotionally good. And then within those two categories, there's two subcategories. So I guess there's 4 ways it can be good. But, technically, it can be good because it perfects the craft, because it makes something pristine and beautiful and timeless, or it can be technically good because it's experimental. It does something with the craft that's never been done before, that pushes the envelope. And then emotionally, a story can be good either because it like plays to your emotion by being an exciting adventure or a heartbreaking tragedy, something that gives you the feels, or it can challenge your emotions by making you think about the world in a different way, like, oh, I hadn't considered that, or oh, maybe I've been treating people wrongly. You know, the way I see it, a book can be good if it does one of those 4 things really well. And this, the closest thing that Spring Snow comes to is like, it's technically well written sometimes. I think it aims for that like timeless beauty. There's a lot of poetry to it, but it doesn't really work as well as it wants to.
On your scale, it makes me feel like this book tried for all 4 points and then snapped back to the center and realized it did none of them.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't even try to be experimental. So it doesn't try to go for all 4 points.
Yeah.
It might have been trying to get... I mean, every book tries to do a little bit, but usually, like, what makes a good book is if one of those or multiple of those, like, shine really brightly. And, again, I just felt like it was mediocre in almost every regard.
Mediocre.
Wasn't experimental at all. Actively failed at making me care about the characters most of the time. Didn't learn anything about the world. And there were some pretty poetic words from time to time. But even then, I'm like, even that much is kind of dubious because this is a translated book. Like, maybe it's more poetic in Japanese and it just didn't translate into English. Or maybe it's more mundane in Japanese and the translator was carrying a lot of work. Like, there's really no way for us to know. That's why I'm kind of curious, like, I wonder how PewDiePie read it. Because, I mean, he speaks, I think, Swedish? Swedish is a language, right?
Yeah.
It's possible he read a Swedish translation, which would be completely different. A lot of people think that translating is like a science, but it's really like an art almost.
Yeah.
I've watched stuff about how people translate stuff, and they're like, yeah, you have to like, you're almost like rewriting an entirely new book if you translate a book.
Yeah.
And so like, the Swedish version could be an entirely different experience that we would have nothing about. It's really hard to say. And I think that also kind of goes against it, because there's parts of this where, like, it doesn't feel very natural.
Well, yeah, like like I told you, the pattern of this story seems to follow a poetry that doesn't, follow English very well. It seems to be bred for a different language.
It's almost like if you take a haiku in Japanese and then bring it to English, like, the syllables don't match anymore.
Yeah.
It's different syllables now, and it like, if you take an English poem and put it into Japanese, it doesn't rhyme.
Yeah, and on top of that, like, the pattern of the stories, like, decision to, in the middle of any scene, to just focus on a random, like, external object or external, like, setting.
Just like, they're walking, and then it's like, oh, this field or this sky, and then he just goes on this long soliloquy about, like, how beautiful or how majestic it is. Or he has a dream, and they're going to tell you about that. And it's like, if the dream had any big significance to the story, I'm not certain exactly.
This literally flies in the face. A lot of this book flies in the face of Chekhov's gun.
Yeah.
We're like, ooh, what does the dream mean? Abso-frickin' nothing.
Or if it does, it might have something to do with the fact that this is the first part in, like, a series.
It may.
Which we'll get to. I can't even explain what the other books are about, because the premise spoils this book.
Not to mention the fact that, like, I had to suffer through this book. I don't want to go through the other ones.
Yeah, apparently this one is the best written of them, too.
Oh, God, that saddens me.
Yeah, I have no interest. Although, we will get to that later, because the concept for the tetralogy sounds really interesting. It's just, I feel like all 4 of them could have been one book, and they could have cut the fluff out of this one and made a lot more interesting story.
All right, well, Joe, we got your thing, and you want mine on a scale of actual things. I feel like this is 3 foppish Japanese men out of 10.
Ooh, a 3 out of 10.
3 out of 10.
Below average?
Below average. Like, it's... I like to describe it as the most beautiful book of nonsense I've ever read. Like, the most beautifully mundane. Because it's like, they are describing, like, a pond. And it's rippling across there, but this is a guy taking a fart over in the corner,
Yeah.
and we're just like, why are you focusing? I understand why you're focusing on the pond. That's a prettier image, but it's still like,
yeah. Like I said, there are moments where like I think the beauty of whatever was originally there, that poetry kind of shines through despite the translation, and then there for the most part it just sort of kind of falls flat.
Hell, the last part of the book is literally a sermon at the very end of, and I'm just kind of like, can I just figure out what the main character's doing?
Yeah.
Why do you have to tell me at the end of the sermon? Couldn't you just, why?
Why do I have to sit through this to just find out the resolution of the story?
And for me, the audiobook, that was 45 minutes I'm not getting back out of my life.
They do take a lot of moments to just sit down and have like a talk about reincarnation or a talk about Buddhism.
And which I understand that's interesting.
And it's kind of interesting, but at the same time, I feel like those are the times when I felt the most like a translation.
Mm-hmm.
Where I think I described it to you. It's kind of like if you hear people do an English cover of a J-pop song, where you can tell they're trying to match the words, but it doesn't feel natural. You can tell they didn't write it like this because everyone's speaking like kind of strangely.
I mean, those parts actually, oddly enough, are the parts that made the most like character sense, because it felt kind of like a dinner with Andre type situation, where like just sitting down and having this awkward conversation that really people tend not to usually have.
That's the thing, is like they weren't bad because it was something they had because they're teenagers,
mm-hmm.
and I remember being a teenager too and discussing things like God and reincarnation and stuff like that, and I did kind of enjoy those, but it always took me out of the story because you go from this like beautiful sweeping prose or an attempt at it to guys just sort of discussing things, and I can almost like hear their accents.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't really give things a score. Obviously you've got your 3 out of 10. I would say, like, if I was going to recommend this for someone, I think it might be better if you know a little bit about Meijing era Japan.
Mm-hmm.
If you're really interested in the author and his strange, like, conservative views and everything. That's the only people I can think of who would really get a whole bunch.
I would recommend this to somebody who would like to see how over-describing a scene can work.
Yeah.
Because this is a really textbook example of filling your book with so many words that are supposed to make the reader
feel
something, and it does completely the opposite. It literally deadened me on several occasions of that, like, a scene happens and I'm just like, they're describing the scenery and all I'm like, get to the fucking point.
Yeah. It's one of those that comes back to that old, like, the curtains are blue.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, like, from a practical standpoint, if I was writing a novel, because I'm much more on, like, making the characters feel something, if I'm going to describe the curtains as blue, it's going to have a practical reason. It does represent something. Because in a story, you don't have to describe anything. And someone who's trying to make a beautiful story might be like, well, it doesn't have any significance to the plot or the characters, but I wanted to describe this beautiful moment for you. And some people, like, if you like poetry, you might enjoy this.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not why I read stories. I read stories because they have a plot. If I wanted to read poetry, I would read poetry. Yeah.
Same here.
And so it's like putting poetry into the book, trying to make it so overly poetic. Like you said, it just kind of gets me disinterested in the story.
Yeah, it makes me think, like, this book would fall on the spectrum of, like, the curtains are blue. You're wanting to hear something about, like, the curtains are blue, but this one's like, the azure curtains weave by several people with 3,000...
I looked into the curtains and I saw within it the infinite stretching of the universe, a intense blue, the blue of my berry soul, the swirling of starry night. And I'm like, I just want him to move past this room and get to the next room. You don't have to explain the curtains! I don't care if I'm peeking the mic. It's my mic, I'll peek it if I want to.
I mean, yeah, this book has definitely got us heated, so let's move on from our spoiler-free...
Well, there is one more little thing, though.
Oh, okay.
Because you did say, like, this would be a good example of, like, going too far with that. I almost think it's subjective. Like, I'm willing to admit that, like, maybe some people really like that stuff. In which case, this would be an example of how to do it well. So, that in a way, that kind of makes this worse for me.
Yeah.
Because it's like,
you have to defend it.
I can read Empress... No, not that. It's like I could read Empress Teresa and just be like, okay, objectively, this is bad, and you can see all the points that make it terrible. And this is like, I really didn't like it, but I guess he was trying to go for something, and I gotta give him a little credit there. So maybe don't do it exactly like he did if you're trying to... It makes it really complicated. It just ends up being boring and mediocre.
Yeah, I'm getting the feeling, this kind of feeling like this is double deviled chocolate cake, and you're like, okay, I can see how it tastes good, but this is too much for me.
See, that's the thing. It's like, I would love chocolate cake with chocolate frosting and chocolate icing. That's my jam.
Joe, don't ruin
my
metaphor.
For you, yeah. But that your metaphor works perfectly, because yeah, I am the kind of person that would stuff down the all chocolate all the time cake, and you would be like, I like chocolate. This is too much.
Yeah.
I would like a little bit of chocolate on some other flavors, perhaps.
Perhaps pair it with a nice cookie.
A nice cookie. Maybe some vanilla? Strawberry chocolate, maybe?
No, we're getting far.
That's too experimental.
Alright,
but yeah, enough about our spoiler-free thoughts. Although, if you have your own thoughts on it, obviously if you disagreed with us, let us know. If you did agree, which a surprising amount of people were like, for 2021, I'm going to be in the book club, I'm going to read along.
We ruined that.
Yeah, well, we didn't ruin it. Whoever did the poll ruined it. But, yeah, a lot of the people in the Discord were like, yeah, I started reading this, and I got, like, halfway through, and I was just like, fuck that character, man.
Yeah.
This story's shit. And they could not finish it, so I don't feel like it's just me. I feel like this is not suited for a lot of audiences.
I mean, like, for the first half of the book, or a good first portion of the book, the main character of Kyo, just feels like this character that needs to get over his stuff for a romantic story to happen.
Yeah, we're going into spoilers now, by the way.
So Kyo feels like he's getting over himself to be this romantic character, and it feels like there's going to be this sweeping moment, and then that culminates with this very beautiful, like, carriage ride that even you, Joe, when you were reading, like, you hated this character, but even then you were like, kiss the damn girl. Kiss her.
Kiss her, you fool.
Kiss her.
Can't you see she loves you?
And I'm reading this, and I'm like, this is so beautiful, and I shouldn't read... I actually texted Joe during reading this that
I shouldn't read romances, and I'm like, no, you probably shouldn't,
because I'm
knowing what's happening, because I was ahead of you.
Yeah, you were ahead of me, but I was like, oh god, this makes my heart hurt. This makes me want to be in a sweeping romance, and I'm like, I'm not, and my life feels empty. But then I'm like, everything after that is a train wreck of the worst kind.
Yeah, I don't know. That does make me think. I'm not sure if I even put this in here, but it's one of those things where I remembered at the time, because I hated Koyaki from the start.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it got to that romantic thing, I was like, I don't like you, but I want you to succeed, because love is a many splendid thing, and everyone should have it. And I'm like, I'm not sure if that's just because as a human I like to see people happy and in love.
Yeah. Or
maybe I thought, like, being in love would change him. Because it does kind of set it up like, oh, he's a teenager, he's young, he's reckless. And I thought maybe this will change him, and the story will be about him evolving.
Yes.
And no, the story is about him staying the same the whole time and just getting more in...
I wouldn't say staying the same, it's just making the same mistake over
and over again, but doing it more passionately.
Yes. The fire in him grows, and then he realizes that it's consumed him, and he's an idiot.
Yeah. I think I described this earlier, where I really like The Catcher in the Rye.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always had people who don't like it talk about, why would I want to listen to this, like, spoiled kid complain for half a book? And I think his complaining, like, it says something about our modern society, about how we view things and what we accept and what we don't accept, and I really liked it. This, I believe, feels to me what those people think that Catcher in the Rye is. It's just a rich dude complaining about his own problems that he has created in his own mental state, and because I don't know enough about Meijing-era Japan to know if it's a criticism of Japan or the changing times...
Oh, knowing the author, it is.
Yeah, it probably is, and maybe I just don't get it, but to me it was just like, he is nothing but, like, a whiner.
Yeah, no, I have tried to defend on several, like, conversations with Joe this character, simply because I don't know. I've tried and find the merit in a lot of characters, but it's a really shallow well to find this guy's.
I guess bottom. That goes into our first point. We didn't really like set up like this is the talking point that I wanted to get. Koyaki as a main character is absolutely awful, and he single-handedly ruins this book.
We also had like a bit of a debate on what his flaw is. You think that his flaw was he feels too deeply, and mine is that his vanity is literally all-consuming in his mind, not in the sense that like he's constantly thinking of himself in a very like I am beautiful, but like he thinks of himself as this higher being so much that he doesn't deign to worry about things happening to him.
He thinks he's the main character in a story and everything will kind of turn out all right.
He is, but ironically, no, it doesn't.
Yeah, which actually does kind of like, you think about the author and it's like, yeah, I guess he really thought that he was going to go and talk to the generals and they were going to be like, yeah, you're right, let's bring back the samurai, and he was going to be a national hero. Even if he, like, maybe if I commit seppuku, it'll inspire them. And no, he just kind of went down as like, this weird remnant of a bygone time.
Yeah, it's a very naive, center-fueled thought process.
I wonder if he was aware of that, and maybe that was his point, that, like, he thought this guy who had all these flaws but felt really passionate was, like, the coolest thing ever. Because, that's the thing, it wouldn't be that bad if just, like, Kyo was a bad character and the story presented him as being, like, a bad character. Like, they were just like, oh, he needs to change. If it was about him learning a lesson. But, like, all the other good characters, all the characters better than him, Honda and Satoko, the ones who have moral compasses and are nice people, are like, Kyo's so great, he's so dreamy, I would do anything for him. He burns with a passion that I've lost. I don't have that in my life, and I'm jealous of him. And it's like, it gives me the feeling that the author is like, the best thing that a person can be is irrationally emotional.
Yeah, I mean, the other character's reaction to him is, well, I mean, we only have like 4 or 5 characters that deal with him on a daily basis. They got the 2 princes. And then you got Sadako and Hondo. Like,
and there's the other guy, his servant, whose name I forget. Who literally has every reason to hate him, and then is like, I hate you so much, but gosh darn it, I respect you.
Inuma does after, during the romance time in the book, he actually starts, because Kyo starts making decisions that aren't obnoxious. He starts making, like, very, like, romantic sweeping things, and Inuma is very much just like, to go back to the passions of old days, which I feel like Inuma and Honda are kind of the contrast. Like, Inuma desperately is emphatic about, like, going back to the way of samurai and all these things.
He has the very author perspective of, like, we need to go back before the Meijing. I don't like how westernized everything's becoming.
And Honda is very much like, we should be more like the Westerners.
Yeah, specifically their laws and their code of conduct and their rational, logical ways of doing. Because he's studying to become a lawyer.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, like each character have a different reason, and I understand some of them. Like I said, with Inuma, it's because he starts making actual good, like not good, actual interesting choices.
Yeah, but I mean that's the thing is like it's so weird to me that people would find these like, oh, he's making an aggressive and heartfelt statement. It's ruining his life and the lives of the people around him. It'll end in disaster. It's bad. But, I mean, look how passionate he is. Like, how could you see that as a good statement? I don't understand. I just don't understand that feeling. Mm-hmm. Or why you would want to go back. Like, it seems like they're romanticizing the idea of, like, the noble lord who, if someone offends him, he'll strike him down. And I'm like, why is that a good thing?
Yeah.
That just seems like, if you're not that noble lord, shit's dangerous. You could offend someone at any point and be killed because of a whim, because of no logical reason.
That dude's a dick.
Yeah.
But no, yeah, like the characters being all like moon-eyed over Kyo is a bit of obnoxiousness, but they also state that from the beginning. That everybody is kind of moon-eyed over him because even when he was a child, all the other people were just like,
he's so handsome.
He's so handsome. He's a 10-year-old damn boy. So handsome.
They do spend a lot of time talking about how beautiful Kyo is. I think we both said like, I'm getting some homoerotic subtext from this.
Yeah.
I thought at the beginning that it was going to be like, he rejects the girl, and then he and Honda have like a forbidden romance or something.
I don't know. I just thought that the author would come out and have sex with him at some point. Because just the amount of times they described the beautifulness of his skin character.
So like I said, it just does everything to make Kyo seem like everyone thinks he's great and perfect. The book seems to think he's great and perfect. And he's a horrible human being, for the most part.
The book is a romance novel for the book towards...
Yeah. But I'm like, and I feel like that undercuts everything. Because the emotional core of this seems to be like, it wants to be a romantic tragedy. Mm-hmm. It wants to be like, look at this young, vibrant person, this young flame snuffed out in the height of light. And I'm like, yeah, when you make those kind of mistakes, that kind of shit happens.
I just realized a little piece there. Like, the main issue that they have is that if they had made this shorter, it would have been a much better book.
Yeah.
But I feel like, to specify this is, if they had maybe elongated the romance and then sharp cut the tragedy instead of making it the 2/3 of the book at the very end of it being tragedy, maybe it would have been an enjoyable ride.
See, because it's a tragedy, because it's supposed to make you feel bad, I don't mind the 2/3 of the book slowly where, like, Kyo keeps trying to make things better and it doesn't work. I think that fits into the tragedy. It's the reason it doesn't work is because the whole reason he's in this situation is the first place is because he's made the stupidest, most, like, irrational decisions in the history of irrational decisions.
Have you read Shakespeare? That happens a lot in those, too.
It does happen a lot, but, like, I guess it doesn't... There's, like, comic relief characters and stuff in here. The closest thing they have to that is the grandma.
Well, that and also, like, the two princes at points to have some fun.
Yeah, they have some fun. I did laugh out loud when, there's a part where they find out... Kyo's parents find out the truth. That he's been, sleeping with with Sadako... And she's engaged to the Emperor's son. So it's, and he's gotten her pregnant. And his dad is like, do you know what this does to our families? To Sadako's family? To the whole country? You threaten the entire empire. Like, you're gonna destabilize everything. And he, like, beats the shit out of him with a pool cue. Is it a pool cue or a cane?
It was a pool cue.
Yeah. And then the old grandma comes in and they mention that, like, she's really old school. She doesn't like how Western things are getting. And she's like, what's going on here now? And they're like, your son slept with the Emperor's wife. And she's like, gosh darn! Nice to see someone taking some initiative for once in this family.
I just picture, like, the hand clap and the hot damn.
Hot damn! Good to see someone's got some balls in this family.
Good to see some short and curlies. Let's do this. Yeah. And then the grandma, like, does an immediate heel turn, is like, and now we abort a baby.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Well, that's the thing, is she's like, okay, son, you had some initiative. I'm glad you did something reckless and crazy. However, we've got to solve your problems, and Grandma don't fuck around.
Grandma does not screw around.
Here's what we're gonna do. The kid's gonna get an abortion. We're gonna pretend this never happened. We're gonna do all these things.
While that happens, enter in the best character in the entire book, Dr. Ming.
You see, you really like this character, and I don't know why.
I don't know why, but I just like the idea.
He only appears for, like, 4 pages.
He only appears for, like, 4 pages, but he is that idea of a very Western doctor as a Japanese man, and he's, like, touted as a very, like, Western-inspired doctor in medicine, and it's interesting how he is, like, the reasons why, and what he is well known for, and that he's also very much still a part of this very feudal idea, because he is doing all of this doctoring and this dealing with a pregnant woman behind closed doors, and in the service of the actual,
the
nobility.
Yeah.
So he is this very, like, combination of the two. He is respected for his Western ideals, but he is
loyal to the empire.
Yeah, he is a Japanese loyalist. And that is interesting to me, as well as the fact that he seems to be a man of even-keel temper, which means that he can't be this annoying as Kyo.
That's the thing, is, like, I guess most of the characters in this are pretty awful. They do awful things, even the good characters do. And so it's like, when they bring in a character who's just like, I'm going to help people, however that may be. You're like, yes, there's a character. You don't have the time to learn about them.
Yeah, he's like, he's a doctor, and he wears a big ring, and he takes it off every time before he gives a gynecological exam. And I'm just like, that man is my hero in this book, because he actually does, something interesting that doesn't make me upset.
He has a character quirk. Mm-hmm. They put that little detail in there, and you're like, it makes me smile.
He puts down fresh papers, and he's well known for that for some stupid reason.
I mean, you look at, 1800s doctors, a lot of them didn't put down little, paper.
Fair point. But that's also another really interesting... I love doctors at the turn of that time.
But going back to Kyo, that's one of the patrons specifically, Ironiclast, his name is... But he asked if the story would still work if Kyo was a likable protagonist. Would this have still gone through everything if he had, if the reason he and Sadako couldn't be together wasn't because of his fault?
If it wasn't, well, it sort of is and sort of isn't at the same time.
I feel like it is 100% his fault.
I would say it's about 95% his fault. There are a lot of other things that do go into this, other characters' machinations do backfire into Kyo's face, which Kyo does react incorrectly, but the other characters caused it just as much as someone else.
Yeah, I guess we should explain for the people who didn't read along. Because we didn't do our little spiel at the beginning. Normally we say, once we get into discussing it, we're going to assume that you've either already read the book or you're not going to. We're not really going to hold your hand and explain everything. But just for a basic rundown, so you know why I'm so angry at Kyo.
Alright.
So basically, Kyo grew up with Sadako. She's childhood friend, stereotypical, Japanese harem candidate number 2.
Mm-hmm. Usually number 1, actually.
Yeah, the childhood friend who knows everything about them and secretly loves them, but he doesn't understand. And, they're getting to the point where they're both considering getting married.
Mm-hmm.
And Satoko makes it clear that she likes Kyo. She makes it clear that she likes Kyo a lot. And then they have a romantic rickshaw ride in the snow, where he kisses her for the first time, and she makes it clear that she loves him more than anything, and he loves her, and they're great. And then, a couple weeks later, they have, not even a fight. She's like, you act really childish, Kyo. And he's like, I'm done with her! I'm done forever! I shall never answer any of her calls. If she tries to apologize, I say no. And, this goes on for, more than a month, right? Several months.
Mm-hmm.
Because they phone... He talks about, she phones him every week, and he says no. She sends him letters. He doesn't even read them. He, calls in a servant and be like, watch, I'm going to burn this in front of you so you can tell everyone that, I didn't read this. He goes out of his way to be as cruel and mean about it as possible. And then his parents are like, well, I thought you and Sadako were going to do something, but she's been talking to the Emperor's son. He seems really smitten with her. They're asking for permission to go forward with a marriage proposal. I could stop this, Kyo. If you care at all, she doesn't have to, but it's up to you. And he's like, I do not care about her in the slightest. She can do whatever she wants. I'm an independent man. And then the second she gets engaged, he's like, fuck, I love her. I want what I can't have, like some spoiled brat. And that's when they start their forbidden love affair. And then, of course, the whole time, it gets brought up because he tells Honda. And Honda's like, you guys are going to get caught eventually. You can't do this. The engagement is coming up. What are you going to do? You're going to run away? You're going to call off the engagement? You got to find something? And he's like, I'm just enjoying my time. He, distinctively made this problem and then is like, a solution will present itself. I don't need to think about the future or plan anything. And then, of course, when things do go wrong, his family's like, well... we're going to abort your kid, and we're going to separate you from Sadako, and we're going to lock you in the house so you can't get out. And that's when he disappears for a quarter of the book.
Mm-hmm.
And he eventually does escape and go out and try to see Sadako later, but by then she's become a nun.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sadako decides to become a nun.
She makes the boss decision of saying, hey, I don't want to go through this marriage, and I'm she actually does still get the abortion, but she is emotionally distraught enough that she decides to become a Buddhist nun. And
to basically to like make up for all the sins she's done,
and
to try to make her life right again, which is a really cool thing, I think.
And then Kyo tries to to talk to her, but after she has been she's taken her vows, she cannot be seen for a year.
Yeah, well, I think she made the vow specifically. They told her, they're like, if you want to be a nun, you have to give up all worldly possessions, and that means Kyo, if you love him. And she's like, I've made my peace with the fact that I'll never see him again, and I have chosen to never see him again, no matter what.
And that was her vow, and so since that happens, she does not, like, admittedly, it does show in other scenes that, like, she sort of not regrets this, but it pains her because...
Oh, yeah.
You hear sobbing from her at another scene. But literally, Kyo just keeps pushing at this wall that will not move.
Yeah.
Essentially.
He manages to escape his house arrest. He goes up to the shrine every day, even though it's snowing. He catches a big fever. He still drags himself up there because he's like, maybe if I can show the universe that I really feel passionate about it, if I, like, on the verge of death, make this trip. And no.
And then he dies.
End of
story.
And the literally last sentence is, 2 weeks later, Kyo died.
And that's it.
But that's the whole reason I was giving this thing was to explain to the fact that, like, Kyo could have made up with Sadako at any time. He purposely chose to be obstinate, purposely chose to not stop her from getting married, only realized after she was getting married that he loved her. And to me, it just rang as, like, this rich kid being like, well, you can't tell me I can't have something. That just makes me want it even more. Like, he only wanted it because he couldn't have it. And then, like, you know, you get to the part where she gets taken away and they're like, oh, we're going to give the girl you love an abortion and then she's going to marry someone else. And he stays at home, and it's not until afterwards that he, like, hears about something that he escapes. And it's like, you could have escaped at any time! You could have made a daring thing! You and Sadako could have run off together! Instead, she's a nun and you're dead! So it's like, you know, I don't feel like at any point he was ever a victim of circumstance. I don't feel like anything was against him. He had everything lined up to lead a happy, good life, and it was only his own failings that caused everything wrong in the story.
Again, I feel like there were parts of the beginning of the book that actually colored his decision-making. That, admittedly, this was not a good decision-making, but it's still the catalyst of other people. We're getting into before the causes and effects here.
Yeah. That's the thing that, like, you know, if this story wanted to be a tragedy that appealed to the heart, it failed because Kyo is an unlikable person. The tragedy is so entirely his fault that I can't feel any sympathy for him. I don't feel sad. If it was trying to be a metaphor, if it was trying to, like, say something about society, it fails on that regard because Kyo's choices are all, like, his own. None of them feel like a result of his upbringing or his society. They all feel like him being stupid. Because everyone realizes, whether they believe in the old ways or the new ways, that he's doing something dumb. Mm-hmm. That he's done, even Honda and even the what's the other guy's name? Inuma. Even the two of them are like, well, you should have just stayed with her while you had her instead of letting her go. And he's like, I'm going to be bold and do this anyway. And they're like, oh gosh, I respect him. I'm like, no, you made your decision, sit with it. So, yeah, just nothing about it works for me, and I don't like Kyo, and it could have been a good story. And I guess you bring up the sequels now, or the other parts of the tetralogy.
Yeah, why not? Like,
because you didn't know about this. I told you this afterwards.
Mm-hmm. I kind of, like, immediately figured it out at the end, where I'm like, oh, there's 4 books. He's gonna be reincarnated, isn't he? Because they talked stupid long about reincarnation.
They talked a lot about reincarnation. His last words before he dies is, we'll meet again under the waterfall. Mm-hmm. And they do some stuff in here where it's like, well, one, just the fact that they spend so much time with Honda, when it's like he doesn't really have much impact on the story.
Well, she has a lot of impact on the story.
Yeah, but they spend time with him when he's not having an impact in the story.
Yeah.
And it feels like they're setting up his character for something else, which is the other books. He's the main character of the other 3 books.
He's also the most solid character out of anybody in this book.
The second book, from what I understand, involves Honda, now as a lawyer, 20 years later, meeting another young, because Kyo's 19 years old. Mm-hmm. So it's 19 years later, he meets a young, brash person that he has to defend, who's like a right-wing extremist, kind of like the author was. And he has the same, like, 3 moles that Kyo had. They go into depth about how Kyo has 3 distinctive moles.
Very creepily. They're like swimming at the ocean and...
they spend too much time on like his supple skin marred by the 3 moles.
Honda stares like blankly
He stares longingly into these moles for a long time.
And that's when I thought they'd kiss. And it was very awkward. Continue.
Not quite. But yeah, he meets a young reactionary who's again very, very passionate and again... very, very doomed by his own actions to be killed at an early age. In this case, executed by the government for trying to stage a coup against it. And he gets executed. And then the 3rd book is 19 years later, and he meets another person. And then 19 years later. So every one is about Honda meeting this young person filled with fiery passion who seems like a reincarnated Kyo and trying to stop them from dying young through their dumb, rash decisions. And it's like, I'm almost kind of curious to read the 4th book just to see, like, does he ever succeed? But considering the author died young from a rash and overly emotional decision, it seems like he was trying to say that's a good thing to do?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that's kind of what makes this so weird to me is like, whatever perspective it was written from, whatever ideals it liked, are so different from my own that I can't possibly be like, yeah, good point. Maybe we should all just, march into the woods until we die.
I mean, hoot hoot, let's do it.
Yeah.
But no, like...
You say hoot hoot?
Yeah.
You trying to make owl jokes?
I mean, yeah, because owls are in the woods.
Who are you to do such a thing?
I'll go next. But yeah, like the idea that it's a reincarnation, I really could not care less about him succeeding in a passion. Yeah. I kind of just want the last book to be like, and then Sadako and Kyo met under the cherry blossom tree, and then they walked off, and Sadako was like, man, you were stupid. And Kyo was like, yeah, you're right. And then they walk off into the sunset. But this is also the very Western me.
Apparently Sadako is in the future books.
As a nun, obviously.
Yeah. She continues to do her thing.
She's probably, like, by that point...
She might go up to be the abbess.
Yeah, she's probably the abbess.
Which I didn't even know that was a title. I didn't know Marquis was a title either.
I knew about both of them. I didn't know what they were.
Yeah, it's something like a baron.
Yeah.
It's just a title. What's the, what was it? I read it, and it took me forever to figure this out, because there's a female version of Marquis.
The Marquise.
The Marquis, okay, because it's written, it's just like, are there 2 Marquis now? I'm confused, and it took me forever to figure out he was talking about the Marquis' wife.
She is the Marquise.
Yeah, like, man, that is a difficult title to get confused.
Yeah,
Marquis and Marquise.
There's a reason why we don't use them anymore.
And what if there are 2 Marquis?
Well,
what do we do now? What the hell do we do now?
You take them off the damn ring. You have that many keys.
But yeah, it's. I think that sounds like an interesting idea. But that's the thing. That could work. But the whole story would have to be from Honda's perspective. Cut out all the drama stuff with Kyo. Don't try to get inside Kyo's head and make me like Kyo. Try to get inside Honda's head and be like,
on that.
Try to be like, why does Honda, this very rational, very logical guy, I can understand a little bit why he'd be impressed by someone who's like not logical and so passionate that they like do amazing things. That like he would march up this hill while like running a fever of like 120 and still make it. And like the willpower is admirable, even if it's for stupid reasons. Like I could read a book where like there are 4 parts and each part is a different person as he gets older, and the struggle of like trying to stop these irrational people from killing themselves, because like if you could put your energy towards something productive, you could set the world on fire with your blaze in a good way.
Okay, so you'd be like, if you put your passions of actually setting the world on fire, I feel like...
And then he meets a young man named Adolf Hitler.
Wow, why am I laughing at that? It actually does remind me of the analogous I made on the character of Kyo before, which is Gaston. Because Literally, Gaston is a product of his raised environment, where everyone's like, Gaston's so amazing. Gaston is great. And it's like, Gaston's like, I can do no wrong. That's how I feel Kyo is, where he's just like, everybody's like, he's this beautiful creature and should be followed. And Kyo's like...
And he's a noble, which makes him inherently right.
Which Kyo just, I feel like, just inherited and was just like, you know what? I am the right way. I am the right way.
Somewhat. I don't know. That's the thing is, like, because they have these discussions, there's enough times when he's like, I'm not really interested in being a noble. What does it really mean to be noble? Like, it's clear from his ennui that he doesn't think he's, like, better than anyone else, or better than everyone else, rather, because of his upbringing. But he still acts like it sometimes. It's really weird.
Also, I'd never known what the term ennui truly, like, felt like.
Yeah.
Until I read this book, and I know that I have both a mild version of it at points in my life, and utterly hate it.
Yeah, everyone feels a sense of ennui from time to time.
Yeah, I like to have an ennui after I've taken a lot of water in, and it's...
You can't see it, but I'm shaking my head. It's what I'm doing. But yeah, so... Regardless, I think we've spent the better part of an hour talking about how shitty Koyaki is. Whatever.
Kyo.
Kyo.
We're just stuck in with Kyo.
Kyokai. Something like that. We're not Japanese. I said this at the beginning.
So I think we can...
We do have a couple other points. Although, unlike most stories, like, I wrote like a page and a half about why Kyo is the worst character ever.
This was supposed to be a rant about Kyo, and it turned into a book review.
Yeah, it came across to everything. But yeah, there are, if you listen through this, there are some things I like about this story. They're little, they're few and far between, but I always try to find some good stuff in there. And I think you found a few things. Obviously, you liked the Doctor.
I liked the Doctor, just because the simplicity of it in this whole complicated mess of a book. And I somehow made him incredibly complicated in that description I made you, somehow.
You made him very complicated in your mind.
Yes.
They didn't have much of a character, but you built this whole thing upon the little mythology that was there.
Yeah, I could, and that's why you could write a better book off of this. I did like that carriage ride. It, like, literally squeezed my heart of every bit of juice for, like, oh, God. Yes. Come on, let's do this. And then, also, the princes. They were obnoxious at times. There's these two princes that are, like,
They're from Siam.
They're from Siam, and they have...
Which is called something else now. I think Siam became Thailand.
Probably.
I'm not sure.
Essentially, they're just, like, the, like, two most, like, background characters that are in the foreground, somehow.
They kind of serve almost as, like, a mirror for Kyo and Honda, because they're also two, like, noble, but they're, like, outsiders, and they have a different perspective on things. I think the most striking difference is, like, they have that whole time where they spend that summer out by the beach. And it's like, they're very, very similar, but then there's a part where they're walking up a path, and they see this giant golden Buddha that was, like, carved out in the woods, and Kyo and Honda are just like, hey, isn't that neat? And the princes, like, fall to their knees.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, I can't believe something so holy is out here. And Kyo and Honda are kind of like, I kind of wish I had that same, like, pathos in me. Because to me, it's like, I just can't have that much faith.
And then they flip it around a few minutes later, I believe, with something else where, like, I think that the Kyo and Honda are, like, apologizing or saying something very formal to someone, and the princes are in the back. They're just being like...
Yeah. I think it shows that what they worship more than, like, spirituality is kind of like, again, the nobility, the empire, the emperor, like, the new westernization, the hierarchy that they've established.
But, like, there is a scene in there, like, they build them up to be actually interesting characters, and sure, they're obnoxious and kind of an aloof people, but they're not terrible.
Yeah, you never really get inside their heads, so it's like, they just seem kind of like neat guys.
And then
there's one moment with them that I found specifically a better tragedy than this entire story, and also more beautiful than almost this entire story. Because one of the princes is in love with, the other one's sister. And he never stops talking about, like, the princess whenever they meet her. He has this, like, green ring, and he's like, the princess gave this to me as an honor-bound thing. I'm coming to Japan to study, but when I go home, I'm going to marry her. And we've been together for so long. And then, like, partway through the story, he stops getting letters from her. And he starts getting worried. And he eventually says, like, oh yeah, I get letters from other people. They tell me the princess is all right, but something suspicious is going on. I don't know why she's not writing me. This is very weird. I wonder if, like, she's busy. Maybe she likes someone else. Maybe something. And then one day they get a letter, and the princess is dead. And it turns out she's been sick for a long time, but she specifically didn't want them to worry. She's like, whatever the prince thinks, I want him to remember me as I was and not think of me ever as being sick or weak or frail. I don't want him to worry about me. But of course she died. And the prince, the one who loved her, like, I think he faints.
They both faint.
They both faint. Well, no, the one faints and the other one just, like, starts crying immediately and, like, falls to his knees. And afterwards he's like, you know, I'm not upset that she died. Everyone dies. I knew that she was going to die inevitably. Like, that's part of life. That's what Buddha teaches. Everyone is going to die. What I'm sad about was that I was so distracted that I didn't notice that she was gone from this world. Because he believes everything is, like, interconnected. Mm-hmm. All things, all life is kind of, like, part of the same chain. And it shakes him to the core, the fact that, like, this beautiful thing left the earth, and he didn't notice that the earth became a worse place for it. Mm-hmm. He's like, if I had paid attention to the wind and the trees and everything going on, I would have realized this was a world without Princess Chan anymore. And I'm like, how could you be so in love with... I don't know. Again, it's part of it seems like Buddhism, but part of it feels like, how could you be so in love with someone that you think that, like, them being in the world makes it brighter?
I mean, that's a thing that's in a lot of romance novels. Also, I do like the fact that they also kind of, like, preempt it with that green ring you were talking about, just being, like,
yeah,
like, lost.
He loses it, and they spent all this time finding it, and it's like, yeah.
They never do find it.
They never do. Because I guess the ring represents her, and she was dead.
I mean, he loses it long before she dies. But
well, no, that's the thing. He loses it like a month before she dies, and they don't find out because of the letter trying to get to Siam.
Oh,
so... She died at the same time he lost the ring. And that's the thing, he's like, I should have known that, like, the universe didn't have her anymore. Like, kind of heartbreaking.
A lot of that scene, like, I do remember, like, reading that part and just being like, wait, she dies?
Like, oh...
Holy crap.
I thought, like, you know, maybe she'd find someone else, or maybe they'd grow apart, or maybe she was worried about their arranged marriage. It's like, no, she loved him up until the end, and that's the true tragedy. Like, through no fault of either of them, like, their lives can never be what they'd hoped it would be. And that made me sadder than anything that had to do with Kiyoki or Satoko.
Yeah, like...
Satoko.
Each of those characters... paled in comparison to that little moment, which is kind of a detriment to the story, let's be honest.
Yeah, because, I mean, that's the thing is, like, when you look at it, whether you want to look at this as being, like, a tragedy, or whether you want to look at it as metaphorical, or whatever, or just, like, plot-wise, the princes don't really offer a whole lot, other than possibly being a mirror for what's going to happen, and that they have their own tragedy. Mm-hmm. Like... They don't really do anything in the show. Well, I guess, what was it? Them coming by is the excuse that Kyo needs to, like, ask Sadako out on a date.
Yeah.
And that's before their carriage ride, when he kind of realizes, like, oh, she does really like me.
And she is pretty.
She is very pretty.
She is the most beautiful one in the room. So why not I just ask her? Yeah.
I'll just do that.
It's literally like a little fire under him to be like, you like her. Just shut up, you damn boy.
I mean, that's the thing. That's the role they serve, is like an inciting incident. Like, they could have disappeared after the story, and it wouldn't have really changed much. Mm-hmm. Other than that aside that has nothing to do with anything was really beautiful.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I did say it's to the book's detriment, but there are a couple of things in the book that actually did hit for you. But, like, there are few and far between. Like,
yeah. Well, there was that, I think I already talked, I really liked the resolution of Satoko's character. Mm-hmm. You said it didn't seem like that she was going to commit suicide, But to me, like, all the chapters leading up to that, I'm like, she ain't gonna be around. She's not marrying this person. She clearly only has eyes for Kyo, and if she can't be with Kyo, she don't want to be on this earth anymore. And so, like, when she and her mom are, like, going to this temple, and she wakes up and she's gone, I'm like, so is she going to be hanging by the tree, or are they going to find her in the river? Like, there's a part where they find a dead dog in a river earlier. And I'm like, what's going on? And then they finally find her, and she's alive. She's just shaved her head. Yeah, and she's like, I'm taking the vows to become a nun, mother. And I'm like, good for you. That's really... And yeah, they have a thing where she talks to the abbess, and the abbess is like, she's not just running away from her problems. Like, she's been thinking about this for a while, and she's very sincere in her dedication to Buddhism and becoming a nun. Like, I'm going to fast track her on the way to do... Well, also, she's like... Her parents want to do some shenanigans where they give the emperor a girl who's, like, already been slept with and also had an abortion, and I don't want the empire to suffer because of that, so I'm just going to stop your shenanigans and keep her here.
And she's still a princess, so yeah. Because these abbesses are apparently still considered princesses, whatever.
I don't know how the Japanese nobility works.
But I do say that, I kind of saw that part coming just because of where they were staying at. Like, yeah. I didn't think that she would just up and murk herself right there. I figured she was coming up with that kind of idea. I, though, see it as less of a, like, her wanting to atone for her sins and all that such, and her just realizing that a life of solitude in devotion to something more...
Something bigger than yourself.
Yeah, is better than being in a marriage where she is obviously going to be loveless while her the man she loves is out there being kind of foppish and an idiot. But
yeah, I don't know. It's a little bit of both. I mean, that's why it's such a great character moment, because like Sadako spends this entire story basically being like doing what people tell her to do, and then unlike so many other stories, she actually makes a decision, and it's a really dynamic, heartfelt one that like informs you a lot about her character. It makes me wish we got more from like
her
perspective and learned more about her, because it's like, oh, that's really cool.
That's a baller moment. Congrats.
Yeah, and then the other, because we did mention that like some of this is poetic, some of it has some pretty good writing and stuff in it, and there was one line in particular near the beginning that not only gave me a good example of like what good writing could be in this, but also like gave me false hope for the kind of character they would set up Koyaki is. Because there's this point where he's walking around the house, Sadako's there with a couple other people, and then Sadako comes over and talks to him, and he sort of realizes like, yeah, she really likes me and everything. And then she says, Kyo, what would happen if I were to leave? What do you think about that? And he's like, I don't know. And she's like, okay. And then she leaves. And he's sitting there thinking about it, and he's like, Sadako came with a single dainty finger and dropped a droplet of ink into the crystal clear waters of my heart. And that slow, murky darkness has just crept into everything. Just made everything murky and dark. Where it's like 3 days later, he's like, what do you mean if I was gone? Are you leaving me? Do you not like me? Are you thinking about killing yourself? Like, what's going on? And it's like, I perfectly understand that feeling about how, like, one little bit of anxiety can go into your life when you think everything's clear, when you think you understand the world, and just make everything dark and murky and like, I don't know what's going on anymore.
I've never lived in the world of a crystal clear lake. Yeah. I only know anxiety.
I only know anxiety. Yeah, so it's one of those things like, if there was more stuff like that, where I could feel like Kyo is trying to be a good person, but this anxiety, his emotions are getting the best of him. And again, it's just like, and then it's ruined by the fact that he spends like 2 months just being a cold-hearted bastard.
Yeah.
Where he's just like, you know, if you had some emotions, you should stop feeling them by now. Like, I would be angry, whatever anger you had at Sadako, surely if she writes you a handwritten letter, maybe you should be like, okay, I'll give her a shot. Because clearly, she cares about you if she's doing this. don't burn the letter, you fool. I think you sent me a text, and you're like, he's burning her letter?
Yes, yeah. That, in all caps, I texted him after hearing that, like, why? Why burn the letter?
You had a chance at reconciliation.
You can throw it in the trash, fine, but you can't read it now.
Yep, now it's gone forever. You'll never even know what it said. Oh, well. So yeah, overall, the book had a lot of good moments. Maybe not a lot of good. It had some good
It had moments that were good, and primarily the book upset us to a degree that we really could not find any merit of it.
Yeah, it really wasn't an enjoyable experience. It wasn't completely without merit. Like I said, it had a couple things there. There's some stuff I'll definitely remember it. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, it was more unenjoyable than enjoyable. And I think that's just about all I wanted to say. I had a couple notes here about there is one interpretation of this that someone told me that I think kind of makes sense, which is the reason why Kyo goes back and forth with Satoko in the beginning is because Kyo's family is this very nouveau rich, new money, westernization, there for the new Meijing emperor, and Sadako's family is this very old blood, former samurai family, like, they don't have as much money anymore, but they still have a lot of status.
Friends of the Emperor for 27 generations.
Yeah.
They say that at least 5 separate times.
And they make a point of, like, how the two families rely on each other. The nobility takes money from the new rich family. The rich family takes status from the old family. And Kyo is raised partially by Sadako's parents. That's why he knows Sadako from childhood. And so they're like, you know, Sadako's family represent the old ways, Kyo's family represents the new ways, and he's stuck in between them. And his back and forth with her is sort of like, I really like the old ways, I like the samurais and stuff, and then realizing it doesn't work, and trying to go to democracy, and trying to do all this new stuff, and then realizing it makes him miserable, only when it's too late to go back to the past. And that this is all about him, like, struggling to regain what was lost in a cultural sense, and being unable to.
And then he dies.
Which is what happened to the author, where he struggled in vain.
Spoiler alert!
He struggled in vain. Spoiler alert for someone's life who died in the 70s. They're like, yeah, he struggled in vain to return to the past, and when it didn't, he killed himself. And it's like, yeah, I guess you could kind of read it like that.
I can see it like that, yeah.
But then if you do that, then it's like, none of the love story stuff really makes sense.
Or matters.
It doesn't have as much romantic impact when you think of him as just being like...
I mean, admittedly, we talked about how the romantic part was only a third of the book.
Yeah.
The rest of it was tragedy and misformed thought.
But that's the thing, like, the romance was only like the first... I'd say a fourth of the book.
Yeah.
But that was, like, the best part of it. Like, that's what it did well.
Yeah.
We both got invested in the romance section. And if you look up Spring Snow, like, most of the covers show Kyo and Sadako, like, hugging or embracing.
Yeah.
They made a movie out of Spring Snow, and the cover is them in the carriage, or in the rickshaw. Like, it's them kissing. That's what people remember from this book. And if you make Sadako just a replacement for samurai-era Japan, then Kyo kissing her loses all its emotional investment.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I don't find as much romance in, like, a man being in love with the warring states period of Japan.
Yeah, but that is considered to be romanticizing of an ideal.
Yeah.
So
I guess if that's... yeah, and again, then it also kind of, like... I guess Sadako fits with that because she goes back to Buddhism, so she's representing the old ways and the way that her family isn't by being honorable. But, yeah, again, it kind of dulls her choices to make her exclusively a metaphor. And even then, like, you're only going to get the metaphor if you understand Meijing-era Japan and the samurai code.
But you know who isn't a metaphor? Dr. Ming.
Dr. Ming don't represent shit. He's a real guy. He takes off his ring for personal reasons, not because it represents the fall of colonialism.
He does it because it is good for gynecological practices, and it is good for his patients.
He puts down paper. Everyone likes it. I like that, like, an hour and a half into this, we're telling these jokes that only people who sat through the book are going to understand.
Yeah, fair point.
But, yeah, did you have any other final notes on this?
Can we get on to the next book soon? Because this was I had to read this during having COVID.
Yeah.
So I got to sit by myself at my dad's house just doing nothing, listening to this depressing crap.
I had to read it all in, like, 2 weeks. And I mean, I live alone anyway, so...
Yeah, well, I
just sitting on a couch for hours on end.
Quarantine. I had to listen to this
Trying
BS.
to speed through the... Yeah. So next month, we've decided we're not going to do a poll again, at least not soon. But we are going to take one of the suggestions from the poll that got, like, the second most votes, which is Guards by Terry Pratchett.
Hell yeah.
It's a book in the Discworld series. If you're unfamiliar with Discworld, it's kind of a unique fantasy series in that, like... There's like 30 books in the Discworld series, but they don't all follow chronologically. It's not like Wheel of Time where you just read them from start to end. There's basically different sets of characters in Discworld, and the books follow different... It's like different stories in the same universe.
But they do cross over. Like, there are characters that, like, you...
Yeah, they cross over, they meet, they have shared... It's basically just like a shared setting that he's written short stories about.
Again, like, Discworld is a fascinating place.
Yeah. Well, I'm just letting people to know because it's like, at least from my perspective, like, if I was looking at Discworld for the first time and someone was like, I want you to read book 6, I'd be like, what about the first 5 books? I feel like I need those. And let me assure you, you don't need them at all. That every book is like, not every book, but most books are self-contained. And like, this is the storyline that follows the night watch of the biggest city in the Discworld.
Ankh-Morpork.
Yeah. I thought it was Ankh-Morpork.
I've heard Ankh.
Oh, okay. Either way, it follows the city watch. And this is the first book in the Night Watch series. Mm-hmm. There's like 7 or 8 books that follow the Night Watch, but this chronologically happens first. So you're perfectly fine in jumping on board with this. It's very short, which is why we're doing it for February. Mm-hmm. And it's a funny, lighthearted book. We may not have as much to talk about. But
we may... Well, I don't think we're going to be raging as much as we have been for this past book. But we will have fun reading it, I'm sure.
Yeah, it'll at least be a fun read. And I've also, like, I have read the first 5 books in the series. So,
let's get ready for that.
Well, I'm just saying, like, if we don't have enough to talk about that, I can rant and rave about the other Discworld books.
I feel like that'll be fun.
Because I'll tell you right off the bat, the first book, not very good. You could tell it's the first book. You didn't have much experience there. I can see why everyone tells you to skip that one.
Alright,
but yeah, thanks for coming. I hope you enjoyed. Hopefully those of you who voted for this aren't too disappointed.
Yeah.
Oh, again, though, if you disagree, let us know down in the comments. For now, though, we're heading out, and, keep reading along that dusty trail wherever it takes you.
That's a good shopping on that one.
You're welcome.